ladies in the prison system. I know they're having a really good work with that. They've been getting a lot of responses, and it's been very successful as of right now. Y'all can't hear me, just so you speak up. And also, our food pantry is getting a little low. If you just grab a bulletin, there's a list of items that we need to have restocked. So just grab one of those on your way out. And there's a bunch of names in there that we need to be praying for. The list is this whole section right here. A lot of names, a lot of people having issues at home, whether health or things of that nature. So keep those people in your prayers. A couple of specific names that we want to point out tonight is Teresa Haywood. Is the wife of Billy Haywood. He preaches in Arlington, Virginia. Okay, she's been having some health issues, so we need to keep that family in your prayers. Also, Katie Houston is in Methodist Germantown. She's having some health issues. Definitely keep her in your prayers. And also, Aspen White. She is the granddaughter of Dio and Donna White. She is going to be having open heart surgery in California in the next few weeks. Keep her in your prayers. And I believe she's only about 5 or 6. She's 8. She's 8. So still, it's very scary, no matter how old you are. So definitely keep that family in the prayers. Those who will be serving tonight, Trent Blaylock will have our opening prayer. Wes McGee will have our closing prayer. Brother Dave Taylor will be conducting our song service. And Brother David Dye will be leading.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this wonderful day. You've given us thankfully let us all come here and worship you. Please let us take what we learned tonight and put it into our everyday lives. Please be with the sick ones as they get through rough times and do what they better now. Watch over us and keep us all safe as we live the rest of our life. In Jesus' name, amen.
Mark number 912 in the song book, that will be a song of invitation. When we sing that song, we'll sing all 3 stanzas and then the chorus. That's the Mark number 912 to number 715. Verses 1 and 2. The church is one foundation, is Jesus Christ our Lord. She is His creation, by water and by word. From heaven He came as Father to be His holy bride. With His almighty altar and for mighty guide. Select from every nation, get one for all the earth. Her daughter of salvation, one Lord, one faith, one word, one holy name she blesses, partakes one holy food, and to one hope she presses, with every grace endued.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. I was told I was supposed to speak from this microphone instead of the other one because apparently it's not working for all online viewers, so sorry about that, but I'll do my best. Tonight I've prepared for us to look at the book of Jonah. So if you'd like to go ahead and turn to the book of Jonah with me, we're going to be looking at it. And the reason I did this is because a few weeks ago, the church I go to back in St. Louis, our young adult group, we meet almost every other Tuesday to do a Bible study, and we've been going through the minor prophets here recently. And we went through the book of Jonah, and initially, when I thought, when I was going into it, I was like, oh, this is another kid's story. We'll be in and out in 30 minutes. I'll be home and studying for the rest of my test for the rest of the week. But that was definitely not the case. There were a lot of really interesting points that were brought up during that study, and so much discussion that after the first hour and a half, we had only made it through the first 2 chapters. But I promise I'm not going to go that long tonight. I'm going to try to do a almost 10,000-foot view with it. So let's go ahead and begin with it. Starting in Jonah 1, verse 1. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me. But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. Now let's pause there for a second. We see initially right there in verse 1 where the word of the Lord came to Jonah. So we know that Jonah was a called man of God. Just like us Christians are called people of God, we are called to go out and do his work. Jonah was called in his day and time to go out and to spread the gospel. But we see as you get down to verse 3 and verse 4, Jonah was like, yeah, I hear you, God, but I don't think I want to do that. He said, no, I've heard about those people in Tarshish, those people in Nineveh, and I've heard they're not nice people, and I don't think I want to go there. And so in order to not do that and to not follow what God had said, he decided to go as far away as he possibly could, and he found a ship going to Tarshish. Now, in order to kind of give us a relationship to how far Jonah was willing to go, just so that he didn't have to do what God was commanding him, I looked it up, and Joppa to Nineveh, which was where God had called him to go, was about the same as going from Memphis to Chicago. About 10 or so hours by car in today's world. But Jonah decided to go from Joppa all the way to Tarshish, which would be the same as going from about Memphis all the way up to the northwest corner of British Columbia, Canada, which is pretty much all the way across country and almost another one. So he was willing to go to great lengths just to avoid the simple task that God was calling him to do. But let's keep reading and see what happens. Continuing in verse 4. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God. And they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship and had laid down and was fast asleep. Let's stop there for a second. So, not only did Jonah get on a ship to go way out of the way, he went down into the belly of the ship and went to sleep, so he didn't even have to think about it anymore. He is really not wanting to do what God has called him to do. But then, the captain of the ship, he's always got his eye on everybody and what everyone else is doing because it's his job to keep everybody safe. So continuing in verse 6, so the captain came and said to him, What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us that we may not perish. And so the captain's like, dude, come on, get up. We're all getting ready to go down, and you're down here sleeping. What's going on here? So then, continuing in verse 7, and they said to one another, Come, let us cast lots, that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us. So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, Tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What is your occupation, and where do you come from? What is your country, and of what people are you? And he said to them, I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Then the men were exceedingly afraid, and said to him, What is this that you have done? For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord because he had told them. See, Jonah had finally gotten to the point to where he had gotten so far removed that he was really afraid and didn't admit it to the captain that he knew why there was a storm raging outside. He didn't admit it to the sailors initially that he knew why there was a storm outside. It took them casting lots and saying, dude, we know it was you. Tell us what's going on. And so naturally, when you find out that somebody's done you wrong and has put you in a bad position, you want to question everything about them to see just how deep in the hole everyone is. And so that's what the sailors did, and we see Jonah's reply there. Well, then, continuing in verse 11, they ask him another question. Then they said to him, "What shall we do to you that the sea may quiet down for us?" For the sea grew more and more tempestuous. He said to them, "Pick me up and hurl me into the sea. Then the sea will quiet down for you. For I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you." So he tells them, look, this is what you got to do. I know I messed up. It's time for me to actually own up to it. But when we see, continuing in verse 13, nevertheless, the men rowed hard to get back to the dry land, but they could not, for the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. Therefore they called out to the Lord, "O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood, for you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you." So the guys have come to the realization after they've done everything they can to save this man's life who has done so wrong. They finally are like, look, God, we're trusting that what he's saying now is actually true, and we're going to do this. Please don't hold us against us, because we already know that if we don't do something, we're all going to go down. And so they listened to Jonah, continuing in verse 15. So they picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. So God spared the people on the ship, but now he's reprimanding his child. He sends this great fish to come and, in a sense, put Jonah in timeout. He's like, Jonah, you know you've done wrong, but I'm not going to kill you yet, but I'm going to let you go down into this fish, and I want you to think about everything that you've done. I want you to really grasp how far you've strayed away from me. And we get just a small glimpse of Jonah's repentance, per se, in the next chapter, in chapter 2. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish, saying, "I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the floods surrounded me. All your waves and your billows passed over me. And then I said, I am driven away from your sight. Yet I shall look again upon your holy temple. The waters closed in over me to take my life, and the deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped around my head at the roots of the mountains. I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you and to your holy temple. And those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope of steadfast love. But I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will repay. For salvation belongs to the Lord." You see, it was in the fish that Jonah finally realized just how great of a mess up he had done. And so we see that after the time spent in the fish, continuing in verse 10, and the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah out upon the dry land. God said, "Okay, Jonah, I believe you understand what you've done. I'm going to give you one more chance." In chapter 3, then the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it the message that I tell you." So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh, according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, 3 days' journey in breadth. And Jonah began to go into the city, going a day's journey. And he called out, Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. And the people of Nineveh believed God. They called for a fast and put on sackcloth, for the greatest of them to the least of them. Then the word reached the king of Nineveh, and he arose from his throne. He removed his robe, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. And he issued a proclamation and published it through Nineveh. By the decree of the king and his nobles, let neither man nor beast, herd nor flock, taste anything. Let them not feed nor drink water, but let man and beast be covered with sackcloth, and let them call out mightily to God. Let everyone turn from his evil way and from the violence that is in his hands. Who knows? God may turn and relent, and turn from his fierce anger, so that we may not perish. And when God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil way, God relented of the disaster that he had said he would do to them, and he did not do it. Now, I'm going to pause there because I know I've gone just a little bit long, but that's okay. We see where God used Jonah in a lot of different aspects. You see, Jonah initially disobeyed God, but had he not disobeyed God, the fishermen on the ship might not have ever heard the word of God. And so God still was able to use that for his glory. And then we see where God used the fish in order to correct Jonah's path to say, look, man, you messed up. Think about it. Figure out where you want to go from here. And once Jonah realized that, God let him out of the belly of the fish, and Jonah was able to do what God had originally called him to do. And now I want to kind of get us to think about that in a modern day sense. How many times have we been like Jonah? How many times has God called us to have that conversation with our coworker about Christ? Or how many times has God called us to go on that mission trip and to serve people who haven't heard the word or have turned away from the word? How many times have we been those people that weren't listening to God? It's a really big thing to think about. How many times have I been like Jonah? So tonight, whether you're Jonah, whether you're the people that Jonah was called to go meet, or whether you're just in the storm yourself, we're your Christian family, and we're here to help each and every person. No matter what stage of life, what stage of the Christian walk you're in, we're all here to help one another and to help further the cause of Christ. So if you need the prayers of the church, if you know what you need to do in order to be saved, to become a Christian, we ask you to do so together as we stand and sing the song of invitation.
Days are filled with sorrow.
pray for the sick that you bring them back to their most wanted health, and we pray that you let everyone get home safely. In Christ's name we pray.
Amen.
Hi, Mike Hickson here. Thank you so much for watching our worship service today. We're so glad that you took time out of your schedule to be a part of our service today. We'd love to invite you to come and be a part of our worship services every Sunday. We'd love to have you on Wednesday night as well. If you have a question or a comment, please feel free to contact us. Hope to see you right back here again next week. Until then, God bless.